solo thru-hiker vanished without a trace in the vast wilderness of Colorado, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. Years passed with no answers, no closure for those who searched tirelessly in the rugged mountain terrain. Then, a weathered hiking shoe revealed its secret, an SD card hidden within, waiting to tell a story that would change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across Mary Johnson's apartment as she meticulously arranged her gear. 3 years ago, the 34-year-old outdoor filmmaker had spent months planning this journey, a solo trek across the entire Colorado Trail. 486 miles of rugged wilderness stretching from Denver to Durango. Day 0, Mary narrated into her camera, her voice steady with practiced confidence. Tomorrow, I become a dot moving across a map. She adjusted her backpack straps, her movements deliberate and precise, a reflection of her detail-oriented nature. The Colorado Trail had called to her for years, not just for the breathtaking vistas or the physical challenge, but for the solitude. The chance to document a journey that was as much internal as external. Mary had built a modest following online with her thoughtful wilderness videos, but this would be her masterpiece. "Sarah thinks I'm crazy," she said, smiling into the lens, "but she'll be tracking every step." Sarah Johnson had indeed thought her older sister was taking an unnecessary risk, but she understood Mary's need for this journey. The sisters shared an unbreakable bond, despite their different approaches to life. While Mary sought adventure, Sarah found comfort in routine, yet she became Mary's most dedicated follower, awaiting each satellite message with a mixture of worry and vicarious thrill. Each evening, Mary would send updates from her GPS device. Her followers grew by the thousands as she shared not just stunning mountain panoramas, but also quiet reflections on solitude, resilience, and the whispered secrets of the wilderness. Her voice became a companion to strangers across the world. "The mountains breathe differently at night," she wrote on day 17. "Sometimes I feel like they're watching me back." By the 3rd week, Mary had conquered some of the trail's most challenging sections. Her confidence grew with each mountain pass, each river crossing. The filmmaker captured it all: sunrises that painted the sky in impossible colors, wildlife that regarded her with curious eyes, storms that tested her resolve. Then came day 23. The message arrived on Sarah's smartphone at 9:43 in the evening, shorter than usual. "Made it through the San Juans, camped near Junction, something weird with the trail markers. Will update tomorrow." Sarah sent back a quick response: "Stay safe. Love you." The message delivered but remained unread. The next day, no update came. Sarah tried calling the satellite phone. Nothing. By evening, unease had blossomed into fear. The silence that followed was absolute. No distress signal. No location ping. Nothing. Mary Johnson, who had documented every sunset and shared every thought, had simply vanished from the digital world, and seemingly from the physical one as well. The search and rescue team descended on Snowshoe Pass within hours of Mary Johnson's silence. Park rangers, volunteers, and mountain specialists converged on the remote alpine basin where her last satellite ping originated. What they found only deepened the mystery. Mary's tent stood perfectly pitched against the wind, her sleeping bag neatly rolled inside. Her backpack rested against a rock, methodically packed with her journal on top. The last entry cut mid-sentence. A small fire pit contained embers still radiating faint warmth. Her cooking pot held the remains of a half-eaten meal. "It's like she stepped away for just a minute," the lead ranger muttered, scanning the pristine perimeter. Most disturbing was the complete absence of footprints leading away from camp. The ground, still soft from recent rain, should have captured her trail, yet nothing disturbed the earth beyond her campsite. The search dogs whined and paced in confused circles, losing her scent at the edge of the clearing, as if an invisible wall had been erected. One experienced handler noted he'd never seen his dog behave this way, sniffing the air, then backing away with a whimper. Sarah arrived the next day, her face tight with worry, as she surveyed her sister's abandoned belongings. "Her hiking shoes are missing," she noted, voice breaking. Mary would never leave without her journal. The team found Mary's drone wedged between two boulders nearby. When they examined the device, the memory card had been completely wiped. Not deleted, but formatted to factory settings. The sophisticated equipment that had captured hours of Mary's journey now held nothing but empty space. For weeks, the search expanded outward in concentric circles. Helicopters swept the valleys, thermal imaging scanned for heat signatures, and volunteers combed every possible route. Yet Mary Johnson had vanished without trace. As autumn painted the San Juans in fire colors, the official search was scaled back. But Sarah couldn't let go. She took unpaid leave from her job, rented a small cabin in Silverton, and immersed herself in her sister's digital footprint. Night after night, she replayed Mary's final video messages, searching for clues in her sister's expressions, in the background landscapes, in the subtle shifts of her normally confident voice. She plotted GPS coordinates on maps, created timelines, and joined online forums where hikers shared theories about the disappearance. By winter, the trail had grown cold. The mountains kept their secrets beneath blankets of snow, and the digital breadcrumbs led nowhere. Sarah's determination never wavered, but as months stretched into seasons, even she began to wonder if the wilderness had simply swallowed her sister whole, leaving nothing but whispers and questions behind. The seasons changed, but Sarah Johnson's grief remained constant. 18 months had passed since Mary's disappearance, and the search had grown cold, like winter settling into the San Juan Mountains. Local hikers whispered stories around campfires, tales of a woman seen walking through fog that shouldn't exist, of trail markers that shifted overnight, of footprints that began and ended in impossible places. Sarah had stopped checking her phone for updates. The Colorado Trail had swallowed her sister whole, leaving nothing but questions that echoed through empty rooms. Until a Tuesday in early autumn changed everything. At Trailhead Treasures, a second-hand outdoor gear shop in Denver, Eliza Murphy was sorting through a fresh batch of donations for their annual back-to-school sale. The shop owner had been running the place for 15 years, recognizing quality equipment with just a glance. A pair of women's hiking shoes caught her attention. Salomon Trail Runners, size 8, worn but still serviceable. They'd been dropped off anonymously, left in a cardboard box outside the shop's door before opening. "These still have some miles in them," Eliza muttered, turning the right shoe over in her hands. Something felt off about the weight distribution. Her fingers found a nearly invisible slit in the insole, professionally cut and sealed with waterproof adhesive. Curiosity piqued, she worked the insole loose and discovered a tiny SD card nestled inside, wrapped in a scrap of waterproof fabric. The memory card was scratched and weathered, its plastic casing dulled by time and elements. The shop owner recognized the model of shoes immediately. They matched the description from the missing hiker case that had dominated Colorado news cycles last year. Her hands trembled as she set the shoes aside and called the police. 3 days later, Sarah received the call she'd stopped hoping for. The detective's voice was measured, careful not to promise too much. "We've found something that might belong to your sister. A pair of hiking shoes with her initials marked inside the tongue." When Sarah arrived at the station, the detective placed the SD card in her palm. "Our tech team confirmed it contains video files, but we couldn't access them all. Some are encrypted or corrupted." The tiny piece of plastic felt impossibly heavy in Sarah's hand. She stared at it, this fragment of her sister's final journey, wondering what secrets it held and who had returned it to the world. "Whoever left those shoes wanted this to be found," the detective said quietly. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Sarah closed her fingers around the memory card, feeling the first spark of hope in 18 months. Mary Johnson had left breadcrumbs after all, digital whispers from beyond whatever threshold she had crossed. Sarah Johnson's fingers trembled as she inserted the tiny SD card into her laptop. She had been waiting for this moment since the mysterious shoes appeared at the Denver secondhand store. 3 years of questions, sleepless nights, and fading hope had led to this small piece of plastic that might hold answers about her sister's disappearance. The screen flickered to life, revealing a folder filled with dozens of video files. Sarah clicked on the first one, and suddenly Mary was there, vibrant, alive, and real. Her sister's familiar voice filled the room as she narrated her journey through the Colorado wilderness. "Day 15 on the trail," Mary announced, her face sun-kissed and smiling. "Just crossed the most beautiful alpine meadow." Sarah spent hours watching the videos chronologically, witnessing Mary's journey unfold. The outdoor filmmaker had captured breathtaking vistas of the San Juan Mountains, quiet moments by campfires, and thoughtful reflections about solitude and nature. In some clips, Mary seemed completely at peace. In others, especially the later ones, a subtle unease crept into her voice. "The trail markers seemed different today," Mary noted in one video, her brow furrowed as she filmed a wooden post that pointed in an unexpected direction. "I've checked my GPS 3 times, but something feels off." With each file, Sarah leaned closer to the screen, searching for clues, drinking in every pixel of her sister's presence. The video showed Mary becoming increasingly aware of something strange happening around her. Birds falling silent mid-song, shadows moving against the wind, and moments where she'd pause, listening to something the microphone couldn't capture. Then came the final clip. Unlike the others, it was only 6 seconds long. The footage was shaky, filmed in near darkness. Mary's face filled the frame, her eyes wide with unmistakable terror. Her voice came as a hoarse whisper. "I walked too far. The trail wasn't done with me." The screen went black. Sarah sat frozen, the echo of her sister's words hanging in the air. A cold dread settled in her stomach as she replayed the clip again and again. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was something else entirely. Something beyond search parties and missing person flyers. She closed the laptop and stared out her apartment window at the distant silhouette of mountains. Whatever had happened to Mary out there, Sarah knew with absolute certainty she couldn't face it alone. She needed help from people who understood the wilderness, who might make sense of what the videos revealed. Tomorrow, she would start making calls. The first name on her list, Tom Davis, the ex-forest ranger who had once searched for Mary and came back changed by what he'd encountered in those mountains. Sarah Johnson sat in her car outside the rustic cabin for nearly 20 minutes before finding the courage to knock. Tom Davis had been her last hope 3 years ago when the search for Mary began, and now she needed him again. When he opened the door, Sarah barely recognized him. The once imposing forest ranger had aged beyond his 48 years. His beard was unkempt, eyes hollow from what she suspected were the same nightmares that haunted her own sleep. "I found something," she said, holding up the tiny SD card. "It's Mary. She left messages." Tom's weathered face tightened. "I can't go through this again," he muttered. But Sarah could see the flicker of something else behind his reluctance. Guilt that had never faded since the Jensen family had vanished on his watch in those same mountains. "You're the only person who knows those trails like she did," Sarah pressed. "The only one who might understand what happened." Inside his cabin, maps covered every wall, the San Juans dissected from every angle, with red pins marking disappearances spanning decades. Tom hadn't stopped searching. He just stopped believing he'd find answers. "I failed her," he admitted, pouring himself a drink. "Just like I failed the Jensens." "Then help me now," Sarah whispered. They spent 3 days analyzing Mary's recovered footage. Tom's trained eye caught details Sarah had missed. How certain trail markers appeared twisted in unnatural directions. how clouds moved against prevailing winds in the background of Mary's cheerful narrations. There, Tom pointed to a frame where Mary stood beside a weathered sign. That junction doesn't exist on any official map. Sarah noticed how her sister's demeanor changed in later videos. Mary's confident smile gave way to furtive glances over her shoulder. Her once steady voice grew hesitant when describing the sounds at night. Not animal, not human, and the strange sensation of being followed by footsteps that matched her own. She knew something was wrong, Sarah said, pausing a clip where Mary's hand trembled while setting up camp. But she kept going anyway. Tom nodded grimly. The mountains get inside you, make you believe you're discovering their secrets, when really... He trailed off, staring at the screen. When really what? Sarah asked. When really they're discovering yours. Tom grabbed his jacket. Pack your gear. We leave at dawn. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Whatever had taken Mary was still out there, waiting. And now they were going to find it, or it would find them. Sarah and Tom were reviewing Mary's footage for the third time when the doorbell rang. Sarah opened the door to find a lanky young man with a drone case slung over his shoulder and an eager smile on his face. Ben Smith, he introduced himself, extending his hand. I've been following Mary Johnson's work for years. When I heard about the SD card, I knew I had to help. Tom eyed the newcomer suspiciously from across the room. The ex-forest ranger had grown protective of Sarah and wary of outsiders since joining the search. And how exactly did you hear about that? Ben's enthusiasm was undeterred. I run a YouTube channel called Wilderness Enigmas. I've been documenting unexplained disappearances in national parks for 3 years. Your sister's case has been on my radar since day one. Sarah hesitated before inviting him in. Ben immediately gravitated toward the laptop where Mary's recovered footage played. His eyes widened as he pointed to a frame Sarah and Tom had overlooked dozens of times. Wait! Pause it there! He exclaimed, leaning closer to the screen. That structure on the ridge, that's the Phantom Watchtower. The image showed a distant, weathered fire tower barely visible through morning mist. Tom shook his head. There's no tower in that sector. I worked those mountains for 15 years. Exactly, Ben replied, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. It's not on any official maps. Hikers report seeing it only under certain conditions, usually dawn or dusk, never midday. I've been trying to locate it for my channel for months. Ben pulled out his tablet and showed them threads from obscure hiking forums where others had glimpsed the structure. Some claimed it appeared differently to each viewer. Others insisted it vanished when approached directly. I've got equipment that might help us, the content creator offered, patting his drone case. Infrared cameras, GPS overlays that can detect terrain anomalies. If Mary found something out there that isn't supposed to exist, I can help document it. Sarah noticed how Ben's eyes lit up at the mention of viral potential, but beneath his enthusiasm lay genuine curiosity, and perhaps a touch of the same obsession that had driven her sister into the wilderness. Mary's last words, Sarah said quietly, about the trail not being done with her. What do you make of that? Ben's expression sobered. I think some places choose who walks their paths, and I think your sister was chosen. Tom sighed heavily. Recognizing the weight of what they were undertaking, as Ben unpacked his equipment with electric enthusiasm, Sarah felt both hope and dread. Their search party had grown, but so had the shadow of Mary's final haunting message. Sarah knew they needed an expert who could make sense of the puzzling terrain markers in Mary Johnson's footage. Tom Davis suggested Claire Martin, a retired topographer he'd once worked with during his ranger days. The 73-year-old woman lived in a modest cabin outside Silverton, its walls covered with hand-drawn maps of the San Juan Range. I've been expecting someone to come asking about those mountains eventually, Claire said when they arrived, her weathered hands clutching a steaming mug of tea. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. They don't behave like normal mountains should. The team spread Mary's recovered footage across Claire's oak table. The topographer leaned forward, fingers tracing contour lines visible in the background of Mary's videos. She paused at certain frames, her expression darkening. "These trail markers," she murmured, pointing to oddly angled cairns in one clip. "They're not standard Forest Service work. See how the stones align with that distant peak? That's intentional." Ben Smith filmed Claire's analysis for his channel, but stopped when she firmly covered his smartphone with her palm. "Something shouldn't be broadcast, young man." Claire revealed that in the 1980s, she'd been contracted to map certain remote sections of the San Juans. "We found anomalies, places where compasses failed, where GPS readings jumped impossibly. Entire valleys that seemed to shift location between surveys." The topographer pulled out yellowed maps from a locked drawer. "These were my originals. The published versions had certain areas smoothed over, corrected they called it. When I protested, they classified my findings and pushed me into early retirement." Sarah noticed how Claire's hands trembled slightly as she traced a particular ridgeline. "Your sister found something they've been hiding for decades. These symbols here," she indicated strange markings Mary had filmed carved into a boulder. "They're old survey markers, but not any official system I've ever seen." Tom paced nervously by the window. "Are you saying the government knows about whatever took Mary?" "I'm saying there are places in those mountains that don't follow normal rules," Claire replied. "Places that appear and disappear. And someone has been monitoring them for a very long time." That night, Sarah awoke to find Claire still at the table, meticulously comparing Mary's footage with her old maps. The elderly woman didn't look up when Sarah approached. "They'll come for me now that I'm involved again," she said quietly. "But I've waited years for proof I wasn't imagining things." She tapped a faded photograph, showing a younger Claire standing beside a strange stone formation. "Your sister found the doorway I spent my career trying to document. The question is, did she go through it willingly?" The group huddled around a worn wooden table at Silverton's oldest establishment, maps spread before them like puzzle pieces refusing to fit together. Sarah Johnson traced her finger along the route her sister had taken, while Tom Davis pointed out discrepancies between Mary's GPS coordinates and official trail markers. "These mountains have stories," came a gravelly voice from behind them. They turned to find Joseph Running Bear, an elderly Ute man whose weathered face held the wisdom of generations, his eyes fixed on Mary's satellite beacon data. "Your sister found the ghost switchback," he said, addressing Sarah directly. "A trail that shifts in moonlight. Hikers follow it thinking they're moving forward, but by sunrise, they're walking in circles, sometimes for days." Tom nodded solemnly. "I've heard stories from search and rescue, people swearing the trail markers moved overnight." Ben Smith, already filming with his smartphone, leaned forward eagerly. "Like a glitch in reality?" "More like a trap," Joseph replied. "The mountains choose who stays and who passes through." Claire Martin unfolded her own topographic maps, pointing to a particular valley. "There's a reason certain areas were removed from public records. Local rangers reported compasses spinning, electronics failing. The government called it magnetic anomalies. Outside the window, fog rolled down from the peaks, unusually thick for midday. An old miner nursing his coffee at the counter glanced nervously at the window. "That there's the standing fog," he muttered. "Watches from the ridges. Follows some folks, ignores others. My daddy saw it take shape once, like a person made of mist, just standing there, watching." Sarah shivered, remembering a clip from Mary's recovered footage, her sister filming a wall of fog that seemed to hold its position against the wind. "What about the folding passes?" Ben asked, his earlier enthusiasm tempered by growing unease. The miner exchanged glances with Joseph. High country miners had a saying, "Don't sleep where the stars look wrong. Some passes up there, they bend, not like normal terrain. They fold space somehow." Claire nodded. "There are survey markers from the 1930s that don't match modern GPS, as if the land itself rearranged." Tom stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I've seen it," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "During that search years ago, walked through a narrow canyon at sunset, came out somewhere else. Same place, but wrong somehow. By morning, everything was normal again." Sarah stared at Mary's last photo on her laptop screen, her sister smiling beneath a strange rock formation that matched none on their maps. "She found one of those places," Sarah whispered, "and I think she's still there." Sarah spent hours hunched over her laptop, headphones pressed tightly against her ears, listening to Mary's voice again and again. The recovered clips revealed a side of the Colorado wilderness that few ever noticed, or perhaps few ever survived to describe. "The trees bend toward me sometimes," Mary Johnson whispered in one clip, her face illuminated only by the glow of her campfire. "Not from wind. There isn't any. They just lean in, like they're listening." Her sister's observations grew increasingly unsettling as the journey progressed. Mary documented shifting winds that changed direction without warning, birds falling silent in perfect unison, and animal tracks that began normally before simply vanishing mid-stride, as if their creators had been plucked from the earth. "Found another set of deer tracks today," Mary narrated over footage of a forest floor. "They walk straight into this rock face and just stop." The camera panned up to show solid stone. No blood, no scuff marks, just gone. These meticulous details, once dismissed as the imaginative ramblings of an isolated hiker, now formed a disturbing pattern that Sarah couldn't ignore. Her sister hadn't been losing her mind. She'd been mapping something beyond comprehension. Tom leaned over Sarah's shoulder, his weathered face grim as they watched Mary document a peculiar junction, where 3 wooden trail markers stood, each pointing in completely different directions, despite claiming to lead to the same destination. "That's not on any official map," the ex-ranger muttered. "That junction doesn't exist." On screen, Mary's nervous laugh echoed through the speakers. "Choose your own reality, I guess," she said, her attempt at humor failing to mask the tremor in her voice. The camera shook slightly as she panned across each marker, lingering on strange symbols carved into their wooden surfaces. "She knew something was wrong," Sarah whispered, pausing the video on her sister's face, eyes wide, smile strained. "Look at her. She's terrified but trying not to show it." Then, who had been quietly taking notes, pointed to the screen. "Those symbols match what we found in the cave. And look at her compass in the corner of the frame, the needle spinning." Claire adjusted her glasses, studying the frozen image. "Your sister wasn't just a filmmaker, Sarah. She was documenting evidence of something the mountains didn't want found." Sarah touched the screen gently, tracing the outline of Mary's face. "She always said the best stories come from paying attention to details others miss," she said softly. "I never imagined those details would be what took her from us." Sarah's laptop screen flickered as the team huddled around it in the dimly lit motel room outside Silverton. Tom Davis leaned forward, his weathered face tense as they reviewed Mary Johnson's recovered footage for the 5th time that evening. "There it is again," Claire Martin said, tapping a bony finger at the screen. "That static isn't random." The retired topographer was right. As they analyzed the files more carefully, disturbing patterns emerged. Several clips contained sections corrupted by eerie static that seemed to pulse with purpose. The distortion carried high-frequency sounds that hovered just at the edge of comprehension, like whispers from somewhere beyond. "Can you isolate that audio?" Ben Smith asked, reaching for his headphones. The young content creator had been unusually quiet since they'd started reviewing the more unsettling footage. Sarah nodded, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision. "I've been running it through different filters. Listen to this." When played at half speed, the whispers became more distinct. Not quite words, but intentional sounds that made the hair on everyone's arm stand up. "This isn't equipment failure," Tom muttered, pacing the small room. "I've seen camera glitches before, but nothing like this." The most disturbing clip came from Mary's 21st night on the trail. Recorded by flashlight inside her tent, her normally steady narration was replaced by a trembling voice. "Something happened today that I can't explain," Mary whispered into the camera. "I was filming the ridgeline when I saw myself. Same red jacket, same pack, same boots, standing about 200 yards away. I waved, but I didn't wave back. Just stood there, watching me." Sarah paused the playback, her hand covering her mouth. The group sat in heavy silence until Claire spoke. "The Ute have stories about the mountains folding in on themselves, creating pockets where time runs differently." Ben nervously fidgeted with his drone controller. "You think these aren't glitches at all? That there's some kind of message? Or warning?" Tom added grimly. Sarah played the final seconds of the clip again. Mary's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder as she whispered, "I think the trail is trying to tell me something." As the screen went dark, the four exchanged looks of determination. What had started as a search for answers was becoming something far more profound. These weren't just corrupted files or the ramblings of an exhausted hiker. They were messages, perhaps warnings, perhaps invitations, from the trail itself. "We need to go back to where she recorded this," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Whatever happened to Mary, the answers are out there, not in these files." No one disagreed. The mystery was deepening, pulling them all toward the same unseen destination. Tom Davis led the team through a narrow ravine, his weathered GPS device marking coordinates from Mary's recovered footage. The morning sun barely penetrated the dense canopy overhead as they approached the cave entrance, a dark slash in the mountainside that matched perfectly with the drone shot from Mary's files. "This is it," Tom announced, his voice hushed with reverence. The ex-ranger hesitated at the threshold, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Sarah Johnson stepped forward first, her determination overcoming caution. "Mary was here," she whispered, running her fingers along scratch marks in the stone, identical to the ones her sister had documented. Inside, the cave opened into a chamber where the air hung unnaturally still. Ben Smith's excited chatter fell silent as his light revealed the first anomaly, a perfectly carved compass rose etched into the stone floor, its intricate design missing the north point entirely. "That's impossible," Claire Martin murmured, kneeling to examine the carving. The topographer traced the edges with experienced fingers. "This isn't recent work. The weathering suggests decades, maybe centuries." Sarah's flashlight caught a flash of red in the darkness beyond. There, wrapped around a small sapling, somehow growing without sunlight, was a coil of vibrant red string, the same distinctive cord Mary had carried for marking trails. "She was marking something," Tom said, crouching beside the plant. "But what grows in complete darkness?" Ben's camera clicked rapidly, documenting everything. "The tree shouldn't be alive," he said, voice tense with excitement and fear. "It's like it exists in two places at once." The air suddenly thickened with the scent of burned pine, so potent it made their eyes water. Claire inhaled sharply, recognition flashing across her face. "The miners called it fold scent," she explained, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Old stories say it appears when the mountains are about to rearrange themselves, when reality buckles." Sarah unwound the string carefully, finding a small knot at regular intervals. "It's Morse code," she realized. Mary was leaving a message. Tom's flashlight beam wavered as a distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling. "We should go," he urged, but Sarah remained transfixed by her sister's creation. "Not yet," she insisted, counting the knots. She's telling us when to return. The burned pine smell intensified as shadows seemed to shift independently of their movements. Ben's camera suddenly died, battery drained to nothing in seconds. "The fold is coming," Claire whispered, her scientific mind struggling with the impossible. "We need to decide. Leave now or stay and see what Mary saw." The letter arrived at Sarah's apartment on a Tuesday morning, tucked between bills and advertisements. The envelope was weathered, as if it had traveled much farther than the postal service could account for. Her hands trembled as she noticed the Silverton postmark, dated just 3 days earlier. Inside was a single photograph that made her sink to the floor, breath caught in her throat. Mary Johnson stared back at her, unmistakably her sister, yet somehow different. Her face had new lines around the eyes, and her signature dark braid was now streaked with premature gray. But it was Mary's expression that truly unsettled Sarah. Her eyes were clear and knowing, holding a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. "Tom," she called, her voice cracking, "you need to see this." The ex-ranger hurried over from the kitchen table, where he'd been reviewing trail maps. His weathered face paled as he examined the photo. "Turn it over," Sarah whispered. On the back, in Mary's distinctive handwriting, the same looping script that had filled birthday cards and postcards for years, were 6 words. "Don't follow the fog, follow the silence." Tom ran his fingers over the ink. "This is recent, not faded at all." "How is this possible?" Sarah clutched the photo to her chest. "She looks older, like years have passed for her, but—" Ben, who had been setting up his drone equipment by the window, joined them. The young content creator's usual enthusiasm dimmed as he studied the photograph. "This could be manipulated," he offered weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew digital manipulation couldn't explain the handwriting or the postmark. Claire entered from the balcony, where she'd been smoking, her experienced eyes narrowing at their expressions. Sarah wordlessly handed her the photograph. The retired topographer examined it with methodical precision. "The background," Claire finally said. "It's the northern ridge of Snowshoe Pass, but something's wrong with the tree line. Those aspens shouldn't be there." Sarah felt her world tilting sideways. Was her sister alive, somehow lost in a place where time moved differently? Or was this an elaborate hoax, some cruel trick played by the wilderness itself? That night, as the others slept, Sarah sat alone by the window, tracing her finger over Mary's face in the photograph. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered. "What's the silence I should follow?" Outside, a heavy fog rolled through the valley, obscuring the mountains beyond. For just a moment, Sarah thought she saw a figure standing in the mist, watching the window. But when she blinked, there was nothing but silence. The night air bit through layers of fleece as Ben Smith adjusted the settings on his infrared drone. The group had set up camp in a small clearing near the narrow canyon where Mary's last coordinates had been recorded. Tom Davis paced nervously, his breath forming clouds in the cold mountain air. "I'm sending it up now," Ben whispered, his fingers dancing across the device's controls. 2-mile radius should give us a good view of the entire area. Sarah Johnson huddled closer to the portable heater, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen displaying the drone's thermal feed. For hours, nothing moved except occasional wildlife, deer mostly, their heat signatures bright against the cool backdrop of stone and soil. At exactly 2 in the morning, Claire Martin spotted it first. "Look there," she said, her weathered finger pointing to the screen. 2 human-shaped heat signatures moved in perfect synchronization up the canyon floor. The figures walked with identical gaits, matching each other step for step. "That's impossible," Tom muttered, leaning closer. "I've got eyes on that entire section." "There's nobody there." Ben quickly piloted the drone lower, the camera zooming in on the canyon. The thermal feed showed the figures clearly, but the regular camera revealed only empty terrain, moonlit rocks and shadow. "They're heading toward that outcrop," Sarah said, her voice tight with a mixture of hope and fear. Could one of them be Mary? The heat signatures disappeared behind a massive rock formation, vanishing completely from the thermal imaging. Ben frantically adjusted the drone's position, searching for where they might have emerged on the other side, but the canyon remained empty. "I'm going down there," Sarah announced, already reaching for her jacket. Tom grabbed her arm. "Not until daylight. Whatever we just saw, it wasn't entirely in our world." The group gathered in their tent, the laptop replaying the footage on loop. Claire spread out Mary's hand-drawn maps alongside modern topographic surveys of the region. Her fingers traced the contours of a ridgeline that appeared in Mary's drawings, but was conspicuously absent from official maps. "Look at this," Claire said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Mary drew this ridgeline extending 3 miles further than any current survey shows. It's as if she was mapping terrain that doesn't officially exist. Sarah stared at the Phantom Ridge, or terrain that exists in a different way. Ben zoomed in on the thermal recording, isolating frames where the two figures were most visible. "These aren't glitches," he said. "And they're not animals. They're people, or something that moves exactly like people." Claire nodded slowly. "The land itself is keeping secrets." Mary found something, a fold in reality perhaps, and now it's showing itself to us. The group fell silent, watching the ghostly figures walk their synchronized path again and again, vanishing into solid rock as if passing through a doorway none of them could see. The blizzard descended without warning, forcing the group to seek shelter in the dilapidated alpine hut. Sarah Johnson pressed her face against the frosted window, watching snow swirl in hypnotic patterns while Tom Davis struggled to light a fire in the ancient stone hearth. "This storm wasn't in any forecast," Claire Martin muttered, her weathered fingers tracing the outlines of their location on her hand-drawn map. "It's like the mountains decided we needed to stop here." Ben Smith paced nervously, his usual enthusiasm dampened by the howling wind. "My drone's battery is dead, and there's no signal up here. We're completely cut off." As darkness fell, Tom managed to coax flames from damp kindling, casting eerie shadows across the hut's weathered walls. The light revealed something they hadn't noticed upon entering, a jagged shard of mirror, deliberately embedded in the wooden planks above the fireplace. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, moving closer. The firelight caught on something etched into the reflective surface. Her heart nearly stopped as she recognized the familiar handwriting, Mary's distinctive slanted script. "Not dead, just not in your time anymore," she read aloud, her voice breaking. The group fell silent, the only sound the crackling of flames and the relentless howl of wind battering the hut's thin walls. "What does that even mean?" Ben finally asked, his face pale in the firelight. "Is she saying she's what? Time traveling?" Claire adjusted her glasses, studying the mirror fragment. "The Ute legends speak of places where time flows differently. Pockets in the mountains where a day might be a year, or a year might be a moment." Tom ran his hand through his grizzled hair. "I've spent 25 years in these mountains. There are things I've seen that I can't explain. Hikers who swear they were gone for hours, when their watches say minutes." "So my sister isn't dead," Sarah said firmly, touching the etched glass. "She's somewhere else, somewhere we can't reach by normal means. Or she's warning us to stay away," Tom countered, his expression grim. "Maybe she found something she wasn't supposed to find." Ben pulled out his notebook, frantically sketching the mirror and its message. What if it's both, a warning and an invitation? Outside, the storm intensified, as if responding to their conversation. The hut creaked and groaned under the assault of wind and snow. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "Mary wants us to follow her, but she's making it clear there's no coming back." The mirror caught the firelight at that exact moment, reflecting their faces back at them, 4 people huddled together, trapped between worlds, facing a choice that would change everything. Spring breathed new life into the mountains as Sarah Johnson ventured alone into the wilderness. The snow had retreated to the highest peaks, wildflowers dotted the alpine meadows, and birdsong filled the air once more. Despite Tom's protests and Ben's offers to accompany her with his drone equipment, she needed to make this journey by herself. The last GPS coordinate from Mary's satellite beacon led her deep into a remote section of the San Juans. Sarah checked her smartphone repeatedly, following the digital breadcrumbs her sister had left behind 3 years earlier. As she approached the exact location, an eerie stillness descended. Birds ceased their chatter, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Mary?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the unnatural quiet. The compass in her hand began to spin erratically, the needle whirling in circles before suddenly reversing direction. North became south, east became west. Sarah stared at the instrument in disbelief, remembering Claire's warnings about magnetic anomalies in these mountains. Without warning, dark clouds materialized above her, swirling into existence as if conjured by some unseen force. The temperature plummeted. Wind lashed at her face, carrying snowflakes despite the spring warmth just moments before. Sarah huddled against a boulder, shielding her eyes from the sudden blizzard. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the storm vanished. The sky cleared to perfect blue, and warmth returned to the air. Sarah stood shakily, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was exactly what Mary had described in one of her recovered videos: weather that defied explanation, that seemed to respond to human presence. Scanning the area with renewed purpose, she noticed something half buried beneath a juniper shrub. Her breath caught as she recognized the distinctive red lacing of a hiking shoe, identical to the one found in the Denver gear shop months ago. This was its mate, weathered but unmistakable. With trembling fingers, Sarah lifted the shoe. Something shifted inside. Turning it over, she carefully probed the toe and felt a hard rectangular object. Another SD card, wrapped in waterproof tape, nestled securely where Mary's toes would have been. Sarah clutched the tiny card to her chest, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't just evidence, it was communication. Her sister had left this here deliberately, knowing that someday someone might follow her path. "I'm here," she whispered to the silent mountains. "I found it." The card felt warm in her palm, almost alive with possibility. Whatever secrets it contained would have to wait until she returned to civilization. But Sarah knew with absolute certainty that the trail was far from over. Mary was speaking to her across time and space, and she would follow wherever that voice led. Sarah's hands trembled as she inserted the tiny SD card into her laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a video file dated 3 months after Mary's disappearance. Her breath caught in her throat as her sister's face appeared, thinner, weathered, but unmistakably alive. "Sarah," Mary Johnson began, her voice steady despite the wind whipping her hair across her face. "If you're watching this, you found my second message. I need you to understand what happened to me." The backdrop behind her showed an unfamiliar ridgeline, bathed in light that seemed both sunset and sunrise simultaneously. "I kept walking after that last day, past where the trail should have ended." Mary's eyes reflected something Sarah couldn't name, not fear, but a profound awareness. Time broke. There's no other way to describe it. Days folded into each other. The sun rose and set in patterns that defied everything I knew. Mary shifted the camera, revealing a landscape that seemed to shimmer at its edges. "I found the place that waits for people like me, people who walk too far, who push past boundaries. We're not the first to discover it. Claire's old maps hint at it. Tom's missing hours happened here." Tears flowed freely down Sarah's cheeks as she listened to her sister's goodbye. Not a panicked farewell, but a deliberate choice. "If you follow, you can't return," Mary continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The path only goes one way. But if you call my name at the mirror tree, the one with the split trunk that reflects itself, I'll hear you. Across whatever divides us, I'll hear you." The video continued as Mary showed a journal filled with intricate drawings of trail markers and astronomical calculations. The mountains breathe, Sarah. They expand and contract. Sometimes they create pockets where time works differently. I'm living in one now. Mary's final words came with a smile that held both sadness and wonder. I'm not lost anymore. I'm just somewhere else. Don't grieve for me as if I'm gone. I'm still walking, still filming, still seeing things no one else has seen. This is what I always wanted. The screen went black, but Sarah sat motionless, the echo of her sister's voice filling the room. Mary sounded calm, resolved, at peace with her impossible choice. Her words carried a hope that felt both otherworldly and achingly familiar, like a childhood memory suddenly recalled. Sarah wiped her tears, knowing what she had to do next. The mirror tree was waiting. The campfire cast long shadows across their faces as Tom Davis finally broke his silence. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he poked at the embers, avoiding eye contact with the others. "There's something I never told anyone," he began, voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, before Mary disappeared, I was leading a search party in this same region. We were looking for a family of hikers who'd gone missing. Sarah leaned forward, her breath catching. Tom had mentioned this failed search before, but never with such gravity. We split up to cover more ground. I headed north along the ridge, Tom continued. Then, nothing. 3 hours just vanished. 1 minute it was noon, the next, the sun was setting. No memory of what happened in between. Claire Martin nodded knowingly, her experienced eyes reflecting understanding rather than surprise. "Since Mary disappeared, I've been having these dreams," Tom admitted. "She's there in the fog, whispering coordinates, landmarks, instructions. At first, I thought it was guilt playing tricks on my mind. Now, I'm not so sure." Sarah reached out and squeezed his arm. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Would you have believed me?" The ex-ranger's voice cracked. "That's why I agreed to help you. I needed to know if I was going crazy or if there was something else out here." Ben Smith had been uncharacteristically quiet, his usual energetic demeanor subdued. The young content creator stared into his laptop screen, scrolling through footage he'd captured over the past weeks. "I've built my whole career on finding places that shouldn't exist," Ben finally said, closing his computer. "Ghost towns, abandoned mines, forgotten trails. I thought I was just good at research, at finding what others missed." He pulled out his smartphone, showing them a gallery of his most viral discoveries. "But look at the pattern. Every place I've documented has some connection to disappearances, to time distortions." The group fell silent as Ben's revelations sank in. "What if my videos aren't just entertainment?" he continued, fear evident in his voice. "What if I've been mapping doorways? What if every time I post a new location, I'm bringing myself and my followers closer to vanishing too?" Sarah thought about the SD card hidden in Mary's shoe, about her sister's final message. The pieces were starting to align in terrifying ways. "Mary knew," she whispered. "She found something out here, something that's been calling to all of us in different ways." Tom nodded grimly. "And now we have to decide. Do we turn back, or do we follow her into whatever waits beyond the trail?" Claire Martin was sorting through her topographic maps at her modest Denver apartment when the knock came. 2 men in crisp government-issued jackets introduced themselves as geologists from the U.S. Geological Survey. Their polite smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Your recent publications about terrain anomalies in the San Juans have raised some concerns," the taller one said, placing a folder on her kitchen table. "These areas are restricted for environmental protection reasons." The retired topographer studied their faces, recognizing the carefully constructed lie. She'd spent 40 years mapping America's wilderness and knew when land was being hidden rather than protected. "Interesting," Claire replied, her weathered hands steady as she poured coffee. I wasn't aware public land could simply vanish from records. The second man leaned forward. We're asking you to cease your research for safety reasons. After they left, Claire called Sarah immediately. They're worried we're getting close to something, she explained, her voice tight with excitement rather than fear. Whatever Mary found, it matters enough for them to try to stop us. That evening, the group gathered in Tom Davis's cabin outside Silverton. The ex-ranger had transformed his living room into an investigation hub, with Mary's footage playing on a loop on his laptop. Look at this pattern. Ben Smith pointed to his digital overlay. The young content creator had mapped every anomaly from Mary's videos, places where compasses failed, where time seemed to slip, where Mary had reported seeing herself. It's not random. It forms a perfect spiral leading to the Phantom Ridgeline. Sarah Johnson touched the red string they'd recovered from the cave, winding it between her fingers. Mary always tied knots to mark her way, she whispered. But these aren't trail markers. They're warnings. Tom unfolded Claire's corrected maps across the table. The official surveys are wrong, he said, tracing the invisible contours Claire had reconstructed. This ridge exists, just not in our time. Mary didn't fall, Sarah realized, her voice breaking with the weight of understanding. She didn't get lost. She found something, a door, a fold in reality, and she chose to walk through it. Claire nodded slowly. The carved compass without north, the mirror with her writing, they're not clues to find her. They're instructions on how to follow. The group fell silent as Ben played Mary's last recovered video clip. Her face was calm, almost luminous as she spoke directly to the camera. Some trails don't end. They just change who walks them. Sarah looked up at her companions, determination replacing grief in her eyes. Mary didn't disappear, she said firmly. She surrendered to the landscape and found something beyond our maps. The dawn broke with unusual stillness over the San Juans. No breeze rustled the pines, no birds called from their perches, just the sound of Sarah Johnson's boots crunching over fallen needles as she navigated the unmarked path Claire Martin had helped her identify from Mary's coordinates. 3 weeks of searching had led to this moment. Tom Davis had wanted to accompany her, but Sarah insisted this final journey was hers alone. Some trails, the ex-ranger had conceded, with understanding in his weathered eyes, are meant for solitary travelers. The mirror tree stood alone in a small clearing, ancient and twisted, its bark reflecting sunlight in unnatural ways, just as Mary had described in her final message. The trunk split into 3 massive branches, each curving back toward the earth before reaching skyward again, creating natural archways. Within the gnarled wood, hundreds of tiny reflective surfaces caught the light, mica, quartz, or something else entirely. Sarah approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The GPS device in her pocket had stopped working miles back, and her smartphone showed no signal. She was truly alone, standing at the threshold of whatever doorway her sister had crossed. "This is it," she whispered to herself, placing her palm against the cool, glittering bark. The tree felt alive beneath her touch, not just living, but aware. Taking a deep breath, Sarah closed her eyes. "Mary," she called, her voice barely audible even to herself. Then louder with more conviction, "Mary Johnson." The silence that followed was absolute. No echo, no response, as if the forest itself held its breath. Sarah waited, counting heartbeats, fighting back tears of disappointment. Perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps Ben's theories about temporal displacement were just desperate attempts to make sense of the impossible. Then, just as she turned to leave, it came. Not an echo, but a response. A familiar laugh, bright and musical, the same laugh that had filled their childhood home. It rippled through the clearing like water, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah spun around, searching frantically. Mary? No figure appeared, But the laughter continued, fading in and out as if carried on waves between worlds. It was unmistakably her sister's, the same laugh from countless camping trips and late-night conversations, but somehow different, lighter, as if freed from earthly constraints. As the sound faded, Sarah felt a profound shift within herself. Not closure exactly, but understanding. Mary wasn't gone. She had simply found her way to somewhere else, somewhere beyond maps and time, where the mountains kept their deepest secrets. Sarah pressed her forehead against the mirror tree and smiled through her tears. "I hear you," she whispered. "I hear you." The group gathered in Sarah's living room, eyes fixed on the television screen as the final piece of footage began to play. It was a drone shot, crisp and clear despite being filmed just 3 weeks ago. The timestamp in the corner confirmed what seemed impossible. "That's Mary," Sarah whispered, her voice catching as she leaned forward. Mary Johnson moved with purpose along a ridgeline that appeared on no official map. Her familiar red backpack, a bright spot against the gray stone, her hair, now streaked with silver, was braided the same way she'd always worn it. She looked older, yet somehow unburdened, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Tom Davis rubbed his weathered face. "That ridge doesn't exist on any GPS system. I've searched every database." "But it exists somewhere," Claire Martin replied, her experienced eyes analyzing the terrain. The retired topographer had spent decades mapping these mountains, yet even she couldn't place this location. On screen, Mary suddenly stopped walking. She turned slowly, as if sensing the drone's presence, and looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were clear, alert, and completely unafraid, the gaze of someone who had found rather than lost herself. She smiled slightly, a private acknowledgement that bridged impossible distance. Ben Smith adjusted his laptop settings. The drone was programmed to return automatically. "I never expected it to capture this." They watched as Mary raised her hand in what might have been a farewell or an invitation. Then, without hesitation, she turned and walked into a dense patch of evergreens, untouched by snow, despite the surrounding white landscape. The camera lingered, waiting for her to emerge on the other side. She never did. The screen filled with static, then went black. "Play it again," Sarah demanded, tears streaming down her face. But when Ben restarted the footage, the file corrupted instantly, leaving only the first frame frozen on screen. Mary, looking back one last time. "She found her way," Claire said softly. "Not lost, just somewhere our maps can't reach." Sarah touched the screen, her finger tracing her sister's outline. "She chose it. Whatever's out there, she chose it." The room fell silent as they contemplated the evidence before them. Mary Johnson hadn't vanished. She had transcended. The trail hadn't claimed her. It had transformed her. Tom stood up slowly. Some wilderness isn't meant to be mapped. Outside, snow began to fall, erasing footprints and covering trails. While somewhere beyond conventional geography, Mary Johnson continued walking her own path.